All right, in this video, we're going to do some playing with fractions and decimals in the same problem. We're going to do some very simple, not too intense, because if you can tackle the simple with a good understanding, you'll be able to take care of the more difficult ones later. So here's the deal. When you have a problem that has both fractions and decimals in it together, the first thing that you have to do is get them in the same form, either all fractions or all decimals. Unless you're using a calculator where you're just punching stuff in that case, you're on your own. If you're doing this by hand to fully understand how this all works, we need them to be one or the other. Now, a Becky experience here, I would say changing fractions to decimals and then playing with all decimals are easier. However, you have to make sure that the fraction to decimal terminates. Meaning, if you change that fraction to a decimal in your calculator and it becomes, 18 million digits long, that's not okay, right? If the fraction to decimal conversion repeats or goes on forever, you must use fractions. No rounding. Rounding is cheating. Rounding gives you an approximate answer. We want exact answers right now, okay? So we're going to get them in the same form, decimals if possible, otherwise we will play with fractions. All right, let's jump in. 3/4 plus 62/100. Now, if we check, right, because remember, we're going to go from fraction to decimal if possible. So I look at my fraction of 3/4. I know that 3/4 is the same as 75/100. So I'm going to go ahead and change my fraction to a decimal. Now I can add. So 0.75 plus 0.62 gives me 1 37/100. Right, so that's my key, right? So fraction to decimal, then you can add, subtract, whatever, a little more easily. All right, let's do another one. 0.73, so 73/100 plus 3/8. Well, again, can we change this fraction to a decimal? And the answer is yes. So my decimal stays the same, and I know that 3/8 is the same as 375 thousandths. Now I can add these two together. So a 5, a 0, a 1, and a 1. 1 and 105 thousandths. All right, and then let's go to our last example. We're changing to subtraction. Exciting. And the third here, 2/3 minus 25/100. 2/3 as a decimal is 0.66666666666. It's repeating, goes on forever. That's not okay. And therefore, we need to play with fractions. And this is where we get a little excitement into our life. Now, I used a nice decimal here, so I know that 25/100 is the same as 1/4. So now I'm playing with fractions. And if you struggle with fractions, which a lot of people do because we don't do them very often, right? In math, any type of math, if you don't do it on a regular basis, right, you lose those skills. It's like anything. If you don't do it, you lose it. So let's just refresh. If I'm adding or subtracting fractions, I have to have a common denominator. So if I look at 3 and 4, I want to change these to have a common denominator of 12. Now, to go from 3 to 12, I multiply by 4. So if I multiply that numerator by 4, 4 times 2 gives me 8. So 8/12 is a equivalent fraction to 2/3. Now, similarly, if I have 1/4, to go from 4 to 12, I multiplied by 3, and therefore I multiply the numerator by 3, and 1 times 3 is 3. So now that I have the same denominator, I can go ahead and subtract, and I know that 8 minus 3 is 5, and therefore simplified 2/3 minus 25/100 is 5/12. So just remember, right, with like these other examples, if the fraction goes to decimal nicely, you notice how much easier it was to play with decimals. However, if we have a repeating or a non-repeating but decimal that goes on forever, we have to play with fractions. So fractions aren't bad. They just take a little more love, right? Open up your heart, let them in, make some math magic